The galaxy was wide and filled with light, but sometimes light could hide shadows. Far from the shining center, the world of Vera trembled under the weight of a threat no one had seen before. The first signs came in the night sky. Farmers looking up saw streaks of fire falling, then silence, then the ground shaking with strange sounds. Days later, the reports began: creatures moving like rivers of black, devouring crops, burning villages, and leaving nothing behind. At first the Varans thought they were storms of nature, but soon it was clear that something alive, something hostile, had come for them. Terran, a leader in one of the largest cities, stood in the hall of council with his people gathered around him. His hands shook as he replayed the latest message from a colony on the far side of the planet. The voice was broken, the screen filled with smoke and cries, until at last the transmission ended in silence. His people stared at him, waiting for hope, but he had none to give. So he did what was left: he called for help. The Union of Worlds was the largest alliance known to the stars. Hundreds of species had joined, bound by peace and trade. Their fleets moved in perfect order, their stations shone like jewels in the dark. Surely, Terran thought, such a great union could not ignore the cry of one small planet. He sent the message out. It traveled through the deep waves of space, reaching council halls and command stations. The words were simple: Vera is under attack. We are dying. Please send help. The answer did not come at once. It came in debates, in long meetings where officials argued with calm voices while far away, Veran cities burned. Some said the threat was too distant to risk their fleets. Others claimed that if one colony fell, another could be rebuilt, but a lost fleet could never return. The days passed, and the messages from Vera grew weaker. Entire regions fell silent. The Union still talked. They spoke of balance, of treaties, of not taking risks that might pull them into war. For the Varans, every hour meant lives lost, but for the Union it was only another debate in another hall. Terran sent a final desperate message: if no one comes, we will not survive. The signal spread beyond the Union's networks, reaching the edges of forgotten space. Many did not even notice. A few species looked and then turned away, saying the fight was not theirs. And then, on a small blue planet known more for its storms and its dangerous wildlife than for its politics, the signal reached Earth. For centuries, Earth had carried a strange name among the stars: a death world. The Union catalogued planets by how safe they were for life. Some were gentle, with calm winds and soft climates. Others were harsher, where survival took skill. But Earth stood apart. It was a place of shifting seasons, of storms that could tear cities apart, of beasts with teeth and claws, of diseases that tested every body that lived there. To the Union, humans were seen as reckless survivors from a world too hostile to raise anything gentle. Yet when the message came, the humans listened. In a small station above Earth, a group of officers gathered around the glowing screen. They watched the broken words, the smoke, the cries of Vera. Silence filled the room after the message ended. No one had spoken yet, but every face carried the same look: shock, then anger, then resolve. Captain Myra was the first to speak. She was young compared to the veterans, but her voice was steady. They asked for help, she said. And no one answered. An older officer frowned. If the Union won't send fleets, why should we? It could be a trap. It could be more than we can handle. Myra looked around the room. Because if we don't, no one will. Do we want to be like the others? Do we want to stand by while they're wiped out? The room was quiet again. Then one by one, the heads nodded. Within hours, orders spread through human stations. Ships were prepared. Not the grand fleets of the Union, but what Earth could gather: frigates, carriers, transports. Volunteers lined up, not only soldiers but doctors, engineers, and workers. News traveled across the planet. Families said goodbye at ports, mechanics worked without sleep to ready engines, and commanders drafted plans with what little time they had. The Union watched, puzzled. Some mocked the humans, saying they would only throw themselves into ruin. Others warned that if humans survived, they would grow even more dangerous. But no one moved to stop them, and no one else offered to go. Back on Vera, Terran stood in the ruins of his hall when a new signal arrived. He opened it with weary hands, expecting silence again. But instead he saw the symbol of Earth, and a human face looking back. "This is Captain Myra of Earth," the woman said. "We received your call. We are coming." Terran blinked, his people gathering around him in disbelief. Help had come not from the Great Union, not from the safe worlds of the center, but from the planet everyone called dangerous, the world others feared. For the first time in many days, hope stirred in his chest. Above the stars, the human ships burned their engines bright, setting their course for Vera. The Union had chosen silence. The Deathworlders of Earth had chosen action. When the message from Vera reached Earth, it spread faster than the officials could contain it. The broadcast of Captain Myra's words played across human networks. "We received your call. We are coming." Those 7 words echoed in every home, every city, every outpost. People who had never heard of Vera now spoke of it as if it were a neighbor in need. For humans, danger was not new. Their history was filled with storms, wars, and disasters that forced them to stand together or perish. And now, faced with strangers calling for help, that instinct awoke again. Captain Myra stood inside the orbital command station above Earth. Around her, the operations hall buzzed with life. Officers shouted orders. Engineers reviewed lists. Pilots checked their flight suits. The station's hum of engines blended with the pulse of urgency. Her second-in-command, a man named Rahul, walked to her side with a data pad in his hand. "The Union still refuses to respond," he said quietly. "Some even sent us warnings. They say we're reckless for going." Myra nodded. "Let them talk. We don't need their permission." Rahul gave a faint smile. "I thought you would say that." In the docks, ships lined the rails. They were not the grand fleets of the Union with polished silver hulls and perfect symmetry. Human ships were built for survival. Their edges carried scars from past storms and battles, their armor layered with repairs and modifications. Each ship had a story, and together they looked less like a parade and more like a pack of wolves ready to leap. Workers swarmed the vessels. Crates of medical supplies, rations, and water filters were hauled aboard. Weapons were checked and loaded. But more than the soldiers, it was the volunteers that caught Myra's eye. Doctors from small towns signed up to travel light years to treat strangers they had never met. Engineers left their families behind, eager to build shelters and repair power grids on a world they had never seen. Farmers offered seeds and tools. Even cooks and teachers wanted to go, believing that saving lives was worth any distance. One young doctor, Anna, was interviewed by a reporter as she boarded a transport. "Why are you leaving everything to help aliens?" the reporter asked. Anna paused, then answered simply, "Because they asked." That answer spread across Earth just as Myra's message had. Because they asked. It became the quiet rallying cry of humanity. Not everyone agreed. Some leaders feared the risks, worried that Earth would waste its strength on strangers. But the wave of volunteers was too strong to stop. Ordinary people filled the gaps that officials left open. Where funding lacked, communities raised supplies. Where transport was limited, families gave up personal craft to carry aid. In orbit, Myra reviewed the final plans. Their fleet was small compared to what the Union could send, but it was strong enough to make a difference. Her flagship, the Resolute, stood at the front of the line. Beside it floated frigates, carriers, and transports, each glowing under the lights of the station. Rahul returned with more reports. "We'll be ready to depart within 24 hours. Pilots are checking in. Crews are locked. Morale is high." He looked at her with seriousness. "But Myra, you know the risks. The enemy could be stronger than we expect. We might not come back." Myra's eyes stayed on the fleet. "I know. But I'd rather fall trying to save them than live knowing we did nothing." Down on Earth's surface, families gathered to watch the sky. Children pointed at the bright lines of ships moving into position. Parents held them close, proud and afraid at the same time. For many, it was the first time they truly saw humanity acting not for power, not for gain, but for strangers in the dark. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Union diplomats exchanged nervous messages. Some believed the humans would be crushed and that Earth would learn a harsh lesson. Others worried that if humans succeeded, it would shame the Union itself. Still, none moved to intervene. In the command hall, the final countdown began. Officers took their stations, screens filled with data, and the deep thrum of engines built like a heartbeat. Myra stood before her crew, her voice calm and steady. "Listen well," she said. "We are not going for glory. We are not going for conquest. We are going because they asked for help, and no one else would go. Remember this when fear rises. Remember this when the fight grows hard. We go because it is right." Her words settled in their hearts like steel. The doors of the docking bays opened. One by one, the ships ignited their drives, burning bright against the black. The Resolute led the way, its engines cutting a path through the void. Behind it followed the fleet, a trail of fire carrying the hopes of both Earth and Vera. As the last ship left orbit, Myra allowed herself a final glance at her home world. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds, all of it shrinking as the stars stretched ahead. "Set course for Vera," she ordered. The ships moved as one, faster and faster, until Earth was only a memory behind them. The Union might have turned away, but the Deathworlders of Earth were on their way. And they were bringing hope with them. The skies of Vera were no longer blue. Thick smoke rose from burning forests, and the once clear air was filled with the distant sound of destruction. The creatures that had come to the planet spread like endless waves, tearing through fields and cities with no pause. For the people of Vera, each day was survival, and each night was fear. Terran stood on the roof of the council hall, looking toward the horizon. His city still held together, but just barely. Walls had been built, patrols set at every gate, and families hidden deep underground. They had fought back with what little they had, but their weapons were no match for the endless swarm. The people grew tired. Hope slipped away with every passing hour. Then, one morning, a sound filled the sky that was unlike the growl of the creatures. It was sharp, powerful, and filled with thunder. Terran raised his eyes and saw streaks of light piercing the clouds. Ships, dozens of them, glowing as they cut through the black smoke. At first, he thought it was another attack. People screamed, running for cover. But when the ships descended, their shapes were strange, different from the creatures. These were machines of steel, scarred and strong. And on their sides, painted in bold letters, was the mark of Earth. They came, Terran whispered, unable to believe it. The Deathworlders truly came. The ships did not land in peace. The creatures sensed them at once and rushed toward the landing fields in a dark tide. But the humans were ready. The air roared with the sound of weapons firing. Explosions lit the ground as the creatures were torn apart by fire and steel. The humans fought with precision, moving as one, their voices calm and their aim deadly. Terran and his guards stood at the wall, watching in shock. He had never seen such power, but more than that, he had never seen such courage. The humans did not hide behind walls. They charged into the swarm, pushing forward step by step, never breaking their line. After hours of battle, the field grew silent except for the crackle of flames. The swarm had broken, retreating into the forests. And the ships of Earth stood tall in the smoke. One of the larger craft lowered its ramp, and a group of humans walked down. At the front was a woman in a dark uniform, her face set with calm strength. She carried no fear in her steps, only purpose. She stopped before the gates of the city and raised her hand. "I am Captain Myra of Earth," she said, her voice carrying through the air. "We received your call. We are here to help." Terran stepped forward, still unsure if what he saw was real. His people looked to him for guidance, their eyes filled with disbelief. Slowly, he approached the human captain. Up close, he noticed the lines of exhaustion on her face, but also the fire in her eyes. "I am Terran," he said at last. His voice cracked with emotion. "We begged the Union for help. They turned away. And yet, you came." Myra gave a small nod. "We could not stand by and do nothing." Terran felt his chest tighten. He had prepared himself to die with his people, but now, for the first time in weeks, hope touched him again. Behind Myra, more humans moved with speed and order. Some carried weapons, securing the area. Others unloaded crates filled with supplies. Doctors in white coats rushed to the injured, kneeling beside Veyron families as if they had known them all their lives. Engineers studied the city walls, already planning repairs. The people of Veyron watched in silence. These were not gods or legends. They were scarred, tired, and mortal. But they acted with a strength that seemed unshakable. Later, Myra walked with Terran through the ruined streets. Children peeked from doorways to stare at the strangers. Some clutched their parents, too afraid to step closer. Others followed quietly, curious. Myra stopped once to kneel before a young boy whose arm was wrapped in cloth. She offered him a ration bar with a gentle smile. The boy took it with wide eyes, as if he had been given treasure. Terran saw this and whispered, "Why? Why risk your lives for us? You owe us nothing." Myra looked at him. "Because someone had to. Because if we do not stand together, then all of us fall alone." Her words struck him deeply. He realized then that the humans were not here for reward or recognition. They were here because it was the right thing to do. That night, the city lights glowed again for the first time in many days. Humans and Veyrons worked side by side, repairing walls, sharing food, and preparing for the next attack. The people whispered to each other as they watched the humans move. The word Deathworlder no longer sounded like fear, it sounded like hope. As the stars shone above the smoke-filled sky, Terran stood on the wall beside Myra. They will come again, he said, looking into the dark forest where the enemy hid. Myra's hand rested on the railing, steady and firm. Then we'll be ready. For the first time in weeks, Terran believed her. The Deathworlders had come, and Vera would not fall so easily now. The sun of Vera rose weakly through a sky still heavy with smoke. For a moment, the world looked quiet, but Captain Myra knew it was only silence before the next storm. The creatures never stopped. They retreated for a time, gathered in the shadows, then came again with greater force. Inside the human command tent, Myra studied a map of the city and its outskirts. Red markers showed where the enemy had struck. Blue markers showed where her soldiers now stood guard. Her second in command, Rahul, leaned over the map. They test us, he said. Every attack is stronger than the last. They're learning. Myra's jaw tightened. Then we learn faster. Reports came in from patrols, small skirmishes at the city's edge, scouts spotting movement in the forests. Each message told the same story: the enemy would not give up until Vera was nothing but ash. That afternoon, the swarm came again. The ground shook as thousands of creatures poured from the tree line. Their bodies were armored, their movements swift and violent. Walls that had held against smaller attacks now buckled under the weight. Human soldiers rushed to meet them. Explosions lit the battlefield as rifles cracked and artillery roared. The air filled with fire and smoke. The Varans watched from behind the walls, their hearts torn between fear and awe. Terran stood among his people, seeing the humans fight at the front. They did not wait behind defenses. They charged into danger, their shouts echoing above the chaos. Some fell, yet the line never broke. Every human fought as if the life of Vera itself rested on their shoulders. Beside him, a Varan guard whispered, "Why do they fight so hard for us? Why do they throw themselves into death for a world not their own?" Terran had no answer. But he remembered Myra's words, because someone had to. Hours later, the swarm pulled back, leaving broken bodies and smoking ground behind. The humans held the city, but at a heavy cost. Soldiers were carried to the med bays, bloodied and burned. The doctors worked without rest, their hands moving as fast as their minds. Myra walked among the wounded, her face stern but her heart heavy. Each soldier she passed looked up at her with tired eyes, but none with regret. They had known the risk when they came, and still they had fought. Outside, Varan families gathered to bring water and cloth to the injured. They were not fighters, but they gave what help they could. For the first time, the humans and Varan stood side by side in the same pain, bound by loss as well as hope. That night, Myra and Terran sat together on the city wall. Fires still burned in the distance, and the cries of the wounded drifted through the air. Terran turned to her with troubled eyes. "You lose so many, yet you keep fighting," he said. "I do not understand." Myra looked at the stars above. "Every life matters," she said. "Every day we hold the city is another day your people survive. That is worth the cost." Terran was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again. "When we begged the Union, they said nothing. They said we were too far, too small, not worth the risk. Yet you came. You bleed for us. Tell me, Captain, is this what it means to be human?" Myra met his gaze. "It means we do not walk away from those who need us. That is all." Her words carried across the wall, where nearby soldiers and Varans listened in silence. They did not speak, but they felt the weight of her promise. The next day, human broadcasts of the battles spread beyond Vera. Small Union ships that had stayed nearby began to record the fights, sending the images across the galaxy. Billions of eyes watched as humans charged into the swarm, as they shielded civilians with their own bodies, as they refused to retreat even when outnumbered. Some species recoiled in horror. They whispered that humans were too dangerous, too reckless, too willing to throw themselves into death. Others felt something different, a spark of admiration, even shame. They asked themselves why they had stayed silent while Earth alone had answered. In the command tent, Raoul showed Myra one of the reports. "They say we are reckless," he said. "That we are warlike. That we cannot be trusted." Myra's face hardened. "Let them say it. Words mean nothing when people are dying." Outside, the Varans rebuilt what they could. They patched walls with stone and steel, carried by hands both alien and human. Children watched the soldiers with wide eyes, some mimicking their stance, pretending to hold rifles made of sticks. Hope had returned, though it was fragile. At night, the fires of the enemy glowed in the forests beyond. Myra stood on the wall, her figure outlined against the flames. She knew the swarm would return, stronger than before. The cost of defiance would only rise. But she also knew something else. The Union might still see Earth as reckless Deathworlders. Yet here, on this battered planet, Vera now saw humans for what they truly were, protectors who would stand in the fire when no one else dared. And that truth, Myra believed, was worth every sacrifice. In the shining halls of the Union, far from the smoke and fire of Vera, leaders gathered once again. The chamber was filled with voices, each one speaking at once, their words a storm of fear and doubt. Screens around them showed images of the battles, humans standing firm against the swarm, humans carrying Veran children to safety, humans fighting with every ounce of strength they had. The Union leaders could not ignore the broadcasts. The proof was too clear. Yet instead of admiration, many spoke with worry. "Do you see how reckless they are?" one official said. "They throw away their lives without care." "They are dangerous," another added. "If they survive, they will only grow bolder." But not every voice agreed. A smaller delegate, from a weaker species, stood and said, "While we argued here, the humans acted. Vera still stands because of them. What does that say about us?" The chamber fell silent for a moment. None wanted to answer. On Vera itself, Captain Myra cared little for Union debates. She had no time for their words. Her focus was on keeping the city alive. Still, she knew their silence hurt the Varans. Supplies were thin. Ammunition was running low. The doctors begged for more medicine. Every day they held out, but every day the weight grew heavier. At last, Myra ordered a message to be sent across the galaxy. It was short and clear, her voice steady though her heart carried the burden of so many lost. "This is Captain Myra of Earth. Vera is under attack. We hold the line, but we cannot do it alone. If you have supplies to spare, if you have the will to help, now is the time." The message spread like fire through the stars. Union leaders tried to dismiss it, but ordinary people of different species had already seen enough. Some felt shame. Some felt admiration. And some felt anger at their own governments for doing nothing. Soon, small transports began to appear near Vera. They were not grand fleets, but single ships carrying food, water, and medicine. A few bold captains ignored their leaders' orders, flying through danger to land near the human camps. When the first supply ship landed, Terran stood beside Myra to greet it. He expected humans, but instead a group of aliens stepped out, thin beings with tall eyes and gentle voices. They carried crates of medicine in trembling hands. "We could not stay silent," their leader said. "We are not soldiers, but we can help." Myra shook his hand firmly. "Your courage matters more than numbers." "Thank you." Word of these small acts spread quickly. More ships followed, farmers bringing grain, engineers with tools, healers from faraway worlds. They were not many, but each one lifted the weight from Myra's shoulders. Terran watched all of this with wonder. Days ago, his people were forgotten. Now, thanks to the humans, others began to see their struggle. He stood before his council that night and said, "The Union turned away, but not all hearts are closed. The humans have opened a path, and others are following." Still, the enemy never rested. The swarm continued to attack, testing the walls, seeking weak points. Each day the humans fought, and each day they grew more respected by the Varans. Children who once hid in fear now ran to greet the soldiers, offering small gifts of fruit or handmade charms. Families called them brothers and sisters. But Myra knew the truth: they could not hold forever. Her soldiers were tired. Supplies, even with new shipments, were limited. And the swarm grew stronger with every assault. One evening, Rahul approached her as she studied the battlefield reports. "The Union watches us, but they will not move. They wait for us to fall, or for us to prove we cannot be broken. Either way, they are afraid of what we represent." Myra closed her eyes for a moment. "We represent action. That terrifies them." Rahul sighed. "And yet, it inspires others." Outside, the campfires of humans and Varans burned side by side. Stories were shared in two languages, laughter mixing with tired voices. For the first time in weeks, the city felt alive again, not only a fortress of survival but a place of unity. The next morning, more broadcasts from Vara spread across the galaxy. People everywhere saw humans and Varans working together. They saw hope in the middle of ruin. And in quiet corners of distant worlds, they asked themselves a question their leaders would not: if the Deathworlders can risk everything for strangers, why can't we? Myra stood on the wall, watching the sunrise break through the smoke. She knew more battles were coming. She knew the cost would rise. But she also knew something had changed. The Union might doubt, but the galaxy was watching. And in that watching, seeds of change had already been planted. The air over Vara grew heavy with smoke. The swarm had returned with greater force, their ships blotting out the stars above the city. The ground shook as waves of enemy creatures poured against the walls, their claws scraping stone and metal. The defenders had little time to rest. The battle was upon them again. Captain Myra stood at the front line, her armor marked with dust and scorch. She raised her rifle and gave the signal. The humans fired in tight formation, every shot precise, every movement practiced. Beside them, Varan soldiers held firm, encouraged by the steady presence of the Deathworlders. Terran watched from the central tower, his heart beating fast. He had seen battles before, but this one felt different. The enemy pushed harder than ever, as if they knew the humans were the true obstacle to their conquest. For every beast that fell, another leapt forward, screaming in a voice that chilled the air. Rahul shouted over the noise of battle, "They are trying to break us before the galaxy believes we can win." Myra fired again, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Then we will show them we cannot break." Hours passed in fire and blood. The walls trembled, cracks spreading under the constant pressure. Twice the swarm breached the defenses, but each time humans rushed to meet them head-on. Hand-to-hand fights broke out in the streets, every corner a struggle for survival. One Veyron elder, watching from a safe shelter, whispered, "They fight like storms. They do not retreat. They do not bend." By nightfall, the swarm pulled back, leaving broken bodies behind. The city still stood, though its defenders were exhausted. Fires burned in the streets, and smoke curled into the night sky. Children huddled close to their families, whispering thanks to the humans who had saved them once more. Yet victory felt fragile. Supplies were almost gone. Ammunition was counted bullet by bullet. Myra knew another attack like this could shatter their defense. That night, she gathered her soldiers and the Veyron council in the Great Hall. The mood was heavy, but she spoke with clear strength. "We cannot wait for the Union to decide our fate," she said. "We hold this city because we believe in life, in freedom, in each other. But the swarm will not stop. We must strike them before they gather again." Terran frowned. "Strike them? Outside the walls? That is too dangerous." Raoul leaned forward. "It is the only way. If we sit and wait, they will grind us down. If we move, we may change the course of this war." The council murmured in fear. No one had dared to face the swarm beyond the city. But then one of the younger Veyron warriors stood. "The humans are right. We must fight not only to survive, but to win. If we die hiding, our children will inherit nothing." The room fell silent. Slowly, one by one, the council members nodded. Terran's heart was heavy, but he too agreed. "Then we fight at dawn." When the first light broke the horizon, the plan was already in motion. Humans and Veyrons moved together, silent and focused. Their target was not the entire swarm but the command nest, a cluster of massive creatures that directed the attacks. If those creatures fell, the swarm would weaken, even if only for a time. The march through the ruined outskirts was tense. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a warning. Myra led at the front, her eyes sharp, her hands steady. Behind her, Veyron scouts guided the path through broken streets. At last, they reached the nest. It was a terrible sight, a pit of writhing creatures, with towering beasts standing like guardians. The ground vibrated with their movement, and the stench of decay filled the air. Raoul whispered, "If we fail here, the city falls." Myra raised her rifle. "Then we will not fail." The battle exploded with sudden violence. Explosions shook the ground as humans launched grenades into the nest. The swarm shrieked, scattering in confusion. Veyron warriors rushed forward with spears and blades, striking the smaller beasts while the humans focused fire on the towering leaders. Terran fought beside them, his voice carrying orders to his people. For the first time, he felt not like a leader hidden behind walls, but like a warrior defending his home with his own hands. One of the great beasts charged toward the humans, its armored hide deflecting bullets. Myra held her ground, waiting until it was close, then fired a rocket into its chest. The explosion sent it crashing to the earth, the ground shaking as it fell. The battle raged until the nest burned with fire and the last command beast lay still. The swarm scattered without direction, their cries fading into the distance. For the first time since the invasion began, silence fell over the battlefield. The Veyrons raised their voices in cheers, their songs echoing through the ruins. They had struck back, and they had won. But Myra knew it was only one victory in a long war. As she stood among the smoking remains, she thought of the Union. Somewhere far away, leaders still argued while others bled. Yet here, On Vera, something greater had begun. Humans and Varans had fought as one. And in that unity, a spark of hope burned brighter than any council speech. The smoke of battle had cleared, leaving the ruins of the nest behind. Vera was scarred, but it still stood. The enemy swarm had scattered, weakened without its leaders. For the first time, the people of Vera looked up at the sky and did not feel fear. Instead, they felt hope. Captain Myra and her crew returned to the city with the Veran fighters. The cheers that greeted them were not only loud but full of tears and relief. Families embraced, children waved small flags, and elders bowed their heads in respect. The humans were no longer strangers. They were heroes. Terran stood before the crowd, his voice strong despite his exhaustion. Today, we live because the people of Earth came when no one else would. We begged for help across the stars, and only the Deathworlders answered. Remember this day, for it is not only our survival, but the proof that courage lives even in the darkest times. Myra felt the weight of those words. She had not come for glory, only to save lives. Yet now, the galaxy was watching. Far beyond Vera, Union channels buzzed with the news. Images of human soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with Veran civilians spread quickly. The Union leaders could no longer ignore what had happened. Debates filled their halls. Some argued humans were reckless and dangerous, that their actions would bring only chaos. But others asked a harder question: why had their fleet stayed silent when Earth had acted? One ambassador said quietly, "We call humans violent, yet they gave their blood for people not their own. What does that say about us?" The question spread like fire. Smaller species who had long feared being abandoned began to look to Earth as a symbol of hope. The idea of humanity as protectors, not just survivalists, began to grow. On Vera, rebuilding had already begun. Humans and Varans worked side by side, clearing rubble, tending to the wounded, and sharing what little food they had. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Children followed human soldiers with wide eyes, copying their salutes and begging to hear stories about Earth. One evening, Terran sat with Myra on the broken steps of the council hall. The sun set red across the horizon, touching the city's wounds with soft light. "You did more than save us," Terran said quietly. "You reminded us of courage. Before you came, we were ready to accept death. Now, we think of tomorrow again." Myra smiled faintly. "We only did what anyone should have done." Terran shook his head. "And yet, no one else did." The words stayed with her. Humanity had been called reckless, dangerous, even unfit for the galaxy. But here, their actions told another story. Perhaps this was the beginning of something greater. Weeks later, a Union fleet finally arrived, not to fight, but to observe. Their leaders came down to the surface, dressed in polished uniforms, speaking carefully measured words. They offered aid now that the danger had passed. But when they saw the unity between humans and Varans, they understood they were too late to shape the story. The people already knew who had saved them. At a gathering in the city square, the Union representative stood as Terran spoke to his people. His voice carried strength, and every word was clear. "We will not forget the silence of those who watched us suffer. But we will also never forget the ones who came. Earth is far, yet its people are now our family. When the stars grow dark again, we will stand with them as they stood with us." The crowd roared in agreement. Humans stood tall among them, not as outsiders but as brothers and sisters. Back on her ship, Myra prepared her crew for the journey home. The war was not over, but Vera was safe for now. Her soldiers were tired, but their spirits were high. As the engines roared to life, Rahul asked, "Do you think the Union will ever see us differently?" Myra looked at the world below, where lights shone again in the streets. "They already do. Maybe not with words, but with what they feel. Fear fades. Respect remains." The ship lifted into the sky, leaving behind a city reborn. Across the galaxy, whispers of humanity's stand on Vera continued to spread. They were no longer just the Deathworlders, no longer seen only as reckless survivors. They had become something greater: defenders, allies, and a force that others could trust when all else failed. In the quiet of space, Myra stood at the viewport, watching the stars stretch before them. She thought of the future, of other worlds that might one day call for help. And she knew the answer already. If the galaxy begged again, Earth would answer. Because that was what it meant to be human.